guys, welcome to another episode of the Hockey Hub. Sophia and Kasey back with you, and as usual, we have a special guest this week. It's going to be Conor Ryan. We're going to bring him in just a sec, but Case, I wanted to set up the show a little bit. We have breaking rumor news. How about that? Not official breaking news, but we have kind of breaking rumor news about who could be the new head coach of the Boston Bruins. We've got Conor Ryan to talk about some off-season moves he thinks the Bruins should be making, offer sheets, so on and so forth. He's an expert, so we're going to kind of dive into what that means, what that looks like. We'll touch on the playoffs, obviously, because that's still happening. Maybe not for long, depending on how the next few games go. And then some Olympic stuff, Winter Classic stuff. But we're all over the place again today, Kasey. Good to have you back. Missed you last week with Adam on.
I know. It's so strange when I don't get to hop on, but I'm excited too. We're going to learn a lot from Conor, and then at least we're narrowing the search for the Bruins head coach, so hopefully some good news coming there. But I'm excited to chit-chat and happy to be back on with you.
Yes. Okay. Without further ado, then let's bring Conor Ryan in. He's on a timeline. He's going to go cover the Patriots after this. A man who has many skills, but especially hockey. I love reading his hockey stuff. I've already told him that his tweets are some of the best in the game. And Conor, we could talk about them, but we're going to get serious. We're not going to talk about funny tweets yet. First of all, thanks for being on the show.
Of course. Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
He's one of the first guys I followed when I got to Boston, too, by the way. So we do love your tweets.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you. I do what I can.
Very informative and entertaining, which is the perfect combo. Conor, you wrote a great article on what the Boston Bruins should do, and you explain how offer sheets work. We want to touch on that, but we're going to start with this breaking news that, again, is still a rumor. It's not official, and we're actually getting more and more updates as the morning goes. But the rumor last night was that Marco Sturm was going to be the new head coach, the next bench boss for the Boston Bruins, of course, with Bruins experience himself. But that isn't official. And one of my favorite sources in the world for hockey news is Elliotte Friedman. This isn't a tweet from him, but he has his podcast, 32 Thoughts. Fantastic podcast if no one's ever listened to it. But this is what he said this morning. I'm under the impression that Sturm is still supposed to visit Boston. Now, whether that's to do another interview or to be given the job, I can't say that as we record, because he was also going live this morning, but he's very much in it. So I really trust Elliotte Friedman, but it seems like all things are pointing towards this. What do you know, and what do you think?
Yeah, it does seem like when you look at the finalists and you've heard, the names Marco Sturm, you've heard Mitch Love, who's the assistant coach for the Washington Capitals, you've heard Jay Woodcroft, the former Oilers head coach. You hear the same names over and over again. And when you hear Marco Sturm, it checks off a lot of boxes, right? Where you obviously have the Bruins connection for a player that was here and scored some big goals for this team. But I think what's impressive about Sturm is the fact that he's kind of carved out his own coaching career, both overseas on the international circuit and then with the LA Kings for what stands as 7 seasons. And I think you look at what he's done there, whether it's serving as an assistant coach on Todd McClellan's staff or spending the last 3 years coaching the Ontario Reign, the Kings AHL team, and developed a couple of guys who are making an impact for the Kings right now, whether it's Quinn Byfield, Brant Clark, a few different players like that. Sturm just seems like a guy that is what the Bruins are kind of looking for. And I think whether it's Sturm, Love, all these kinds of younger coaches, I think what the Bruins are doing here is they're trying to set the tone of what they're looking for this offseason. And I think if you're bringing in a guy like Sturm, who's 46, who's waiting for that opportunity to be an NHL head coach, has kind of paid his dues in terms of the amount of experience he has, working with a lot of different coaching staffs, obviously helped Team Germany win a silver medal at the 2018 Winter Olympics. It's easy to look and just be like, well, it's a former Bruin. Of course, this guy makes a lot of sense. But he's a guy that I think you look at his resume and his track record, it's a guy who's due for an opportunity. And I think if he is the guy, Bruins fans should be excited to see what he can do to kind of mold and build and I think grow, especially with what's going to be a pretty young and revamped roster moving forward.
Yeah. If he does happen to be the guy, is it hopeful that he'll stick around for, more than a year or 2 or even 3 seasons? 46 years old, known to have key development with younger players, good with blended locker rooms as well, because some of the veteran guys that he had for the Ontario Reign team, were a little bit older and got their tap to the LA Kings a little bit later on. So could this also be a helpful sign for just structure coming back into play?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you look at like the different paths the Bruins could have gone with this head coaching search, and they've obviously cast a very wide net. But I think when you look at who they've been linked to, whether it is Sturm or, these younger assistant coaches that are waiting for that opportunity, I think that signals a Bruins team that I think they have high expectations and they want to get back in the playoffs as soon as possible. But I also think bringing in a younger coach for the long haul at least projects stability, and I think more importantly patience, right? That I don't think it's going to be like we need to make the playoffs right away this year. That is the main goal, and we're going to move assets and do everything we can to get back to it. I think if you have a younger coach like Marco Sturm, who's you look at some of the hallmarks of what he's done, and a lot of people mention communication and working with younger players and relating to players as being a former NHL player who played pretty much a decade ago. I think bringing in a coach like that signals that this team is going to at least extend some patience to Sturm or whoever it is and give them a time to build up the roster. Whereas if they opted for, the Peter Laviolettes, the Gerard Gallants, the John Tortorellas, these guys who they have an established track record, right? And they usually get results pretty quickly, but then it kind of fizzles out in a year or two. I feel like even if maybe there's more risk with a younger coach like Sturm, it does feel like that's the guy you hire to be here for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, and have him develop with the team as opposed to trying to do the quick fix where, if they got Laviolette, it's like, all right, are the Bruins just trying to get back into the playoffs, have that 1 year bump and see what happens? I know, listen, Bruins fans want to get back in the playoffs as soon as possible, but I also think the smart move is to be patient and see what you can do with this team in the next couple of years and develop what's going to be a pretty young roster moving forward.
Conor, I've changed my mind 1,000 times about whether it mattered if the Bruins' new head coach had Boston Bruins experience. And at first I was like, no, it doesn't matter. Culture, whatever, like figured that would just stay in the room and try to, bring it back this season because it was a little lost last season. But then, I was thinking maybe it does, especially with this unclear captaincy and just how important that is to the Bruins. Anyway, I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but where do you stand on that? And not sure if you can answer this question. If you can't, that's okay. But what do you know about his voice and what kind of voice he had in the room when he played? And where do you stand on him understanding the culture being important as a head coach?
Yeah, I do think having that experience is going to be key in terms of, what he's going to do if he is the head coach of navigating an offseason that has a lot of question marks. Like hiring Marco Sturm, if that's the case, is just step one of 50 the Bruins have to do this offseason, right? They got a lot of work to do. And I think even if this team is really active this offseason, which we all expect, they're going to enter camp with 1, 2, 3 roster holes or a lot of question marks in terms of who's going to be where, which younger guys are going to step up. And a lot of it's going to fall on the head coach to really see what he can do to navigate a team that probably isn't all going to be a finished product this offseason. They're not going to be able to account for all the different deficiencies in this roster over the span of one offseason, even if they have about $28 million in cap space. So I think having a guy that knows the market, knows how vocal, I guess, the fans can be, opinionated, maybe is the best way to put it. I think having that experience can go a long way. And from what you hear about Sturm and what he's done, communication's always what you hear about in terms of just, being really upfront but relatable to younger players, up them through the ups and downs that every NHL player goes through, whether it's them learning their game in the AHL or going up to hockey's highest level. And also, it seems like when you look at what I think his main hallmarks is as a coach, it's a lot of drawing from kind of what the Kings do best, which is playing a pretty structured, grinding style of game. And maybe that's not the most exciting product on the ice at times. I know Tom McClellan loves to do the 1-3-1 quite a bit. But I think also if you're the Bruins and you've got so much to do this offseason, I think the most important thing, if you're trying just to right the ship pretty quickly, is getting back to your identity as a defense-first team, build from the goaltender out. If you do that, I think that at least sets you on the right track. So bringing in a guy that is going to preach those principles in Sturm, I think, makes a lot of sense if that's who they're targeting as their new head coach.
I love that question, Sophia, because you mentioned market, Connor, and you see a lot about this needing to be a market that players want to play in and obviously coaches want to coach in. And I think Sturm could be a guy that can make it more attractive again. And plus, he's got some ties to players that I'm hoping, I'm not going to say strong arm, that he can convince to come play in Boston, especially with the offer sheet conversation. But is there something that you know about him that would make this market more marketable, to make players want to play here outside of his communication and the fact that he's a strong former two-way winger? I know that the center conversation is consistently talked about in terms of building out this team, but do you think that he can just kind of have a better eye to make this more attractive?
Yeah, I think you look at his track record, especially of, developing, and it's not just guys in the AHL, but guys that were younger players with the Kings who have now blossomed into key spots with the Kings now from when he was an assistant coach. And I think if you're, especially going into like the offer sheet conversation, if you're a younger player who's 22 to 24, who's looking to take another big step forward, I think you see what Marco Sturm has done in the AHL and the NHL. Even if you're a free agent who's looking for your first big contract, you think you can hit another gear with a guy who's has that reputation as being a key developer and Marco Sturm. I think it makes an appealing destination. The Bruins already have, the appeal of the original six. They've got the opportunity to play with David Pastrnak, all these kinds of things. But I think especially a head coach kind of sets the tone for what the roster is going to be or what's going to be their foundation or their principles. And I think selling, free agents or anyone on a coach like Sturm, a former player who's still young, that still seems like he's willing to grow with the game and do what he can to help younger players, especially, take a big step forward. I think there's a lot of appeal to having a guy like that running the show.
I agree. And like I said, there were so many candidates out there. And as we were hearing more and more names, I was doing more research into each one. And the more I think about it, the Bruins experience does matter, even though at the beginning I was like, I don't think so. But Connor, we have you on. Originally, we didn't expect this breaking news. We wanted 20 minutes of your time. We only have 10 left to talk about your fantastic article on offer sheets. The reason it was fantastic and what the Bruins, might be doing this off season, was a lot of great information, but we want to start with just the explanation, like you did in your article, of what that process looks like and the cost to some teams if they go that route. So can you give us a little technical breakdown before we get into what the Bruins might be doing?
Yeah, using offer sheets and, targeting restricted free agents it's something that I feel like reporters and media people talk about in the offseason, and then it never actually gets put into practice by teams. It's something you don't see all that often because it's usually pretty tough to pull off, because essentially you're targeting a free agent who a team still holds his rights going into free agency. So you essentially have to submit an offer sheet to a player. So you send out a contract. Usually it has to be a pretty hefty raise from whatever that player, who's usually due for their first big contract at that stage of their career. Usually they're 22, 23, 24. You submit an offer sheet and the team has an opportunity to match it, the team that holds the player's original rights. They can either match it, which most teams end up doing if that ends up being the case, because a lot of times you're essentially negotiating that contract for the original team, which is pretty convenient. But if it is a team that either doesn't have the cap space to accommodate that contract, or they got to move out 2 other contracts on their roster to accommodate that offer sheet, they'll usually let that player go. And if that's the case, the team that does sign that RFA not only gets the player, but also has to submit or give up draft compensation. And it can kind of depend on how hefty the contract is. It's based off of the average annual value. So if you're signing a guy to a contract between $2.5, $4.5 million, it's going to be usually it's like a second and a third round pick is what you end up giving up for compensation. If you're signing a player that's going to end up having a contract of $7 million, it's usually a first, second, and third round pick. So it's a principle that you don't see that often, because one, you're probably paying a premium for a player, and you're also giving up draft picks as well. And it also has to be your team's own draft picks. It can't be, if the Bruins wanted to do that, they can't give up like Toronto's 2026 first round pick or anything like that. So it's a practice you don't see that often, but I think you look at what the St. Louis Blues did this past year, where they targeted a team, the Edmonton Oilers, who didn't have a lot of cap space. They got a lot of it tied up to 2 really good forwards up front, so it made a lot of sense. And the Blues signed 2 kind of unproven guys in Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, thinking that, hey, they didn't get a lot of run in Edmonton, but we're going to sign them for affordable deals, give up what was essentially a second and a third round pick and put Edmonton in a tough spot where they can't match our contract offers and bring these guys aboard. What happens? Philip Broberg, who was kind of a spare defenseman with the Oilers, ends up being a top 4 defenseman this past year for St. Louis. And then Dylan Holloway, who I think had 6 goals this past year with Edmonton, ends up having almost 60 points. So I think when you look at offer sheets, it's a bit of a gamble. But if you're able to identify, especially those younger players that are due to break out, especially, it's a really smart way for a team to add what could be a high value player for what could end up being a pretty good value if it is someone who is just not broken out yet with their original team.
Yeah, the risk versus reward, that's always a fun game to play. Back to the strong arming that I'm hoping can potentially possibly happen. Are there any candidates that come to frame of mind for you? Because JJ Peterka, unhappy with the Buffalo Sabres, has the German background as well, could play for a German head coach. I feel like there's ties there, not to mention is that Jokiharju, his former teammate as well, assisted him on a number of goals throughout his season. So there's connections here that I think could help amplify the results. But are there candidates that jump out to you? And don't tease me with Matthew Nyes, because it's never going to happen and it breaks my heart.
Yes, I will say a lot of people immediately point to Matthew Nyes, but I almost feel like when you're looking at an offer sheet, right? If you wanted to sign Matthew Nyes, who a great player, you sign him here, he's going to be a 30-goal guy the next 4 or 5 years. So I think we all agree on that. But to do that, you're probably offering an insane contract that Toronto probably is still going to match. Toronto has a bunch of cap space, especially if they let Mitch Marner and or John Tavares go. So you have that issue. And also, if you wanted to sign him, are you signing Matthew Nyes to a $9 million contract? That means you're also giving up 2 firsts, a second, and a third-round pick to get him? Probably not. I like Matthew Nyes, but I don't know if he's worth that. And so I think it's, instead of signing a guy like Matthew Nyes, it's finding the next Matthew Nyes, right? It's the guy who maybe has 10 goals the previous year, but you look at his underlying numbers or his usage, and you feel like he's due to break out. It's kind of like, I know he wasn't a restricted free agent, but like Morgan Geekie was a guy that you looked at his numbers and how he wasn't really used all that much in Seattle. And you're like, all right, if you put him in a middle 6 spot, you can get a useful player out of it. So I think JJ Peterka is a young player that makes a lot of sense, right, in terms of his skill set. He's got the German ties with his Marco Sturm, so that could be pretty appealing. But I also look at players like Will Cooley with the New York Rangers. They're a team that has somehow freed themselves from all this cap jail that they were in by moving like Trouba's contract, Barclay Goodrow's. Now they're right back in cap jail because they took on JT Miller's contract. So don't really know what New York is doing, but they could be a team that if you give someone like Will Cooley a pretty good offer sheet, they may not be able to match. And he's a guy that, had 300 hits this past year, had 20 goals, only 2 of them on the power play. Like, that's the type of player that his floor is maybe a line-driving, third-line regular for the next 5 years, but maybe he's the next Nyes where he could be a 30-goal guy down the road. Like, I think it's all about finding players like that. There's Luke Evangelista for the Nashville Predators, who had 10 goals this past year on a pretty bad Nashville team. Like, nothing too crazy, but you look at his numbers and he puts the puck on net. He's averaged, I think he's one of the best players in terms of shots on goal per game. He's a guy that you look at him, if he can be a middle 6 player that ends up being a 20 goal regular, and you can offer sheet him for $3.5 million, maybe that has more value than signing like Brock Besser to an $8.5 million contract, right? If he ends up being a 20-goal guy. So it's easy to, I think, immediately look at the Bruins cap space and look at, Mitch Marner, Brock Besser, Nikolai Ehlers, and those are the flashy names, and they would help for sure. But I think if you're especially trying to, plug multiple spots in this lineup, using that offer sheet to bring in someone like a Cooley, Evangelista, can at least give you someone in the middle 6 that can help you right away, and most importantly, I think can really build and grow with your team for the next couple of years moving forward.
Love that. That was kind of where I was going to go with my last question. We only have a couple of minutes left, Conor, and then you got to go. So I will wrap with a quick one. But just if you don't mind furthering that thought just a little bit, because your article does explain it, why go the offer sheet route? Is it essentially just to not overpay, to not just look? We talked about the Nyes thing, could be an overpay situation. Don't think Don Sweeney would ever do that. If I know anything about the Leafs, they will overpay people. So that's happening for sure. You can put my money on that. But is it essentially because of where they are in terms of this like retooling process. It's, maybe getting kind of the sneaky middle line guys that they can develop themselves, that may not turn the season around immediately, but kind of turn into a Morgan Geekie. And sorry, last quick one. Don't know if you can answer this, but how long does a team have to match the offer? Is it like a as long as they want kind of thing, or a 24-hour process when that happens?
I believe I want to say it's about a week, so they have a little bit of time. So I think there's a lot of teams that probably get the offer sheet and they then open up their version of cap friendly and like, all right, what contracts are we going to move here to
Right.
make something happen? So they do have some wiggle room there to see what they can do. So again, you have to be smart in terms of, finding the right type of team that really doesn't have a lot of cap space. You look at like when the Montreal Canadiens offer sheeted Sebastian Aho, Carolina immediately matched it and they were like, thanks for doing our contract negotiations for us. Yes, we wanted to keep Sebastian Aho. You made it a lot easier for us. So the same thing with Matthew Nyes. If the Bruins were to give a huge contract to him, I'm sure Toronto would be like, oh, thanks. Like, we didn't have to even go through the whole process. We didn't have to go to arbitration or anything like that. So I think, especially when you look at offer sheets, it's not the end-all, be-all, and it's still something that is not widely used. But I think when you look at just how talent efficient, especially the Bruins rosters, especially up front, I do think if you're able to sign, a guy like Cooley or Evangelista or Paterka, it gives you a guy that, is a younger player that can grow with your team, but also even if you're kind of paying up front for potential with some of these players, I think you almost have a better chance of, hitting gold with someone like that, as opposed to, again, someone like Brock Besser. And I like Brock Besser as a player, but he's a guy that if you're paying $8.5 million for 25 goals, like, would you rather than roll the dice with Will Cooley, who could be a 25 goal scorer, and you're getting him for $4.5 million, right? I think people look at how much cap space the Bruins have and they're like, oh, they're going to be able to sign 3 or 4 guys easily. I don't really think that's the case. It's going to dry up pretty quickly, especially if you're going for some of the top names on the market. So I think you have to be selective and find ways to get the most value out of what your cap space is this offseason. And I think offer sheets is the way to go there in terms of maybe adding a forward or two that has higher upside.
Absolutely. I think we've learned that it doesn't always take a big name to level up a roster, and that's what we love about hockey. It's chemistry, and that plug and play is very important. Cooley's fantastic. Got to cover him for a hot minute this past fall in New York, so he jumped in on the top 6 guys a number of times and helped drive the engine that was New York trying to figure out their system at the time. So get more on this. Connor had a great article breaking down the offer sheet information. Connor, thank you so much for joining us. Also, great highlights for Jeremy Swayman over at Worlds, crushing it 7-0 and helping pull off a gold medal win for the first time in 92 years. So check out Connor's work. It's time for Sophia and I to hit a break. So Connor, go get your Patriots stuff in and join us on the other side of this quick break here at Hockey Hub.
Thanks, Connor. Welcome back. Sophia and Kasey here with you. We just said goodbye to Conor Ryan, good tweeter, fantastic writer, great journalist, and he put out an article on how the Bruins should be using offer sheets this off season to boost or bolster their roster. And we had to let him go because he had to go, but I could have asked him a bunch more questions. Yeah. Really informative if you guys want to read it over at Boston Globe. But Kasey, I wanted to touch on the process itself. Something he said in the article, which I wanted to bring up, but we ran out of time, which was kind of funny. He's like, if you do this, you might get booted from the lunch table the GMs might boo you. It's kind of like trying to date someone's current boyfriend. You know what I mean? It's like, let me take your boyfriend out for a cup of coffee.
It's the subtle
and
hints.
If he likes it better here, I'll take him. And it's like, I'm not cool with that. You know what I mean? Right. I am not cool with that.
I love that.
But it is how the game works. But I always try to find analogies of like real life scenarios. But essentially, it was explaining, you give this restricted free agent an offer sheet, and then obviously the current girlfriend of the guy or the current owners of the team, the people who have their rights, they get to decide if they want to match it or not. So in one way, he did say it might make the process easier for the team that's negotiating the contract if they're setting market value or whatever it is. But on the other end, you got to be sure it is, I don't want to say snaky. It is part of the game, but GMs have relationships too. And in working and talking with many of them around the league, sometimes they don't like doing deals with each other if you rub them the wrong way. So you gotta, it's gambling. You gotta be sure that you're not doing this to a bunch of people, because it's not a free for all. It's not like, let's just try and see where it goes. This is also a relationship thing, and you got to be careful a little bit with that.
Yeah, it's almost like a more ominous way of doing business, and you already kind of hate that feeling of something that's like, is it happening? Is it not happening? But they have to be so inconspicuous about it. That's a great analogy, especially because I just watched a show where a guy just kept coming for this other dude's girlfriend, like no shame about it. And you're trying to create an enticing offer and atmosphere to make a player change their mind. And usually when they put on that sweater, their first mindset is, making an impact with that team, with that roster, kind of starting their legacy where they're at. And you're talking about players that are coming from, other dynasty teams or original six teams. So I feel like that kind of ups the ante too, because when you talked about Will Cooley specifically, you're coming from the Rangers. They got a lot of heat on their back as well, but that's an original six team. So I can imagine how the conversations and the negotiations can be a little touch and go, considering the foundation of both of these teams. But what I also like that he mentioned and elaborated on was just the fact that, like, it could be the smarter option. I think we've talked so much about, the free agents that are going to be coming up this summer, and you're looking at such extensive contracts of $8+ million, and you're hoping that they're going to just immediately level up your roster. But I feel like, and I don't want to speak for Bruins fans, but I feel like, there were some acquisitions where they weren't feeling like it panned out right away, or it panned out enough to make a statement to go spend more money on a free agent. So that it has a risk and reward sense to where, like, you can protect yourself from coming out of pocket too much, but also it's the draft picks. I just wonder if the draft picks are going to be worth it, and it also depends on the caliber of the player.
Yeah, for sure. The draft pick graph, which we don't have, but it is in the article. It's great. You can potentially give up several first round draft picks. I think 4 if like the contract's over 11 million or something like that, a certain amount of money. But it is a ridiculous cost if you're going high for the bigger guys. But I do, we've touched on free agency in this summer. The pool isn't like the least interesting, but it's also not the most interesting because of, some of the bigger names. You already know that they're going to get max money or close to max money. And then you have these like middle of their career, maybe leaning towards not the end, but someone like John Tavares, definitely towards the end, a Brock Besser, a Nikolai Ehlers, kind of middle of their career. And is it worth the market value or wherever they're sitting? And that's what Conor's point is. The $28 million in projected cap space that the Bruins have is going to go quickly. And I like the idea of allowing another team to develop these guys. And he said, probably stay away from the guys like Nyes that everyone's talking about, and pick the Morgan Geekies of the world if you can. And that's what the whole point of the staff and scouts, and that's their job, So if they can get a couple guys where the Bruins are only giving up a later round draft pick and get them for a decent cost, love that idea. But anyway, unless you have anything else to say about it, Case, I'll give you the floor. If not, we can move on to the Stanley Cup final. Any final thoughts on his appearance on our show?
Yes. Loved that insight that he mentioned about going for the guys, like getting another Morgan Geeky, because I think it just pans out better. But just for some names thrown out there that are not in the Matthew Nyes conversation, Evan Bouchard was another name because of what the Oilers did, as Conor mentioned beforehand. They're not shy when it comes to the offer sheet conversation. I mentioned JJ Peterka because I think that there's great connection there, and obviously he'd be reunited with a teammate that was impactful to his play. Mason McTavish, he's another guy who's been on the market, 22 years old. So that age range that Conor expressed would be better to go for, especially considering the candidates that are being mentioned for the Bruins head coaching job. You've got probably 4 or 5 guys in the mix that are between the ages of that 22 and 24. A couple guys out of Minnesota, so there could be a reunite for Kuznetsov. So there's a couple of ties here where, like, it doesn't have to be a big name because they're going to be with guys that they've played with previously. And then you have a potential head coach that's really keen on developing and encouraging and motivating those younger players to make an impact. So go read Conor's article.
Great job throwing in those names and doing some research for us there of like who exactly he could be talking about in the article, who the staff could be targeting. I don't know if I've said this on the show, but I'll probably say it all the time. I have like actual decision paralysis. I have such a hard time making decisions. So this is just,
I didn't know that.
So stressful. Yeah, actually, like little things like do I want coffee or tea today? I'm like stuck. I like freeze. So
I had
something
both
I'm
this
working
morning.
on. Oh yeah, or both, exactly. But can never do the job. So I just let the pros do it. I couldn't even begin to like imagine of what decisions I'd be making, and especially with like, oh god, it's giving me stress just thinking about the
Just
market, the
processing it.
pressure.
I was
Yeah,
like that
just
too. And then it was weird because growing up as a military brat, my parents used to get so frustrated with me about that. And then all of a sudden I was just constantly like, all right, just pick one, just pick. But I'd have so much anxiety after the fact. So I totally get it.
it's a lot of stress, and like Sweens takes a lot of heat for the decisions he makes, but like I said, he's made some good ones for sure as well, and now we're just waiting to confirm who the head coach will be. And then to your point, this whole offer sheet stuff, guys that are going to sign the off season, you need to know who the head coach will be and what kind of attraction they might bring. Okay, I mean, I can still go on this, but I think we should move on to the conference finals that are both in 3-1 series leads now. And I definitely thought that we would be going 7, and obviously there's still the potential in both. Are you surprised with how dominant Florida has been and how dominant the Oilers have been?
Yeah, starting with the Oilers side of things, actually, because I think that's probably one of the matchups, Oilers and Dallas Stars. I think last time I went to about 6 games, but this was already being raved as something that was going to be a juggernaut matchup. And as soon as you hear juggernaut and, you know, all of these key terms for a battle, you get excited about it. And then it just kind of deflates. I mean, I mentioned on here a couple of times, there's things about the Edmonton Oilers that I did underestimate. I'll take full tap on the shoulder for that, because goaltending, whenever it's questionable, a lot of things can happen, but Stuart Skinner just kind of gets hotter as things go along, and helps a really formidable offensive team such as the Oilers. You got Connor McDavid telling the media we could play defense. So as for the media side of things, as for the personalities you're seeing out of the Oilers, I appreciate that. But after everything the Dallas Stars have gone through in terms of like close and no cigar and just doing it over and over again, I thought that they were going to put up a better fight. I thought we were going to see better depth scoring come into play. There was so much conversation about like, you haven't seen the best of us yet, because they had key players that were injured that finally joined the lineup, and it still feels like it hasn't packed any punch. So that's where some of the lack of entertainment came for me. Like, I feel like we were on the edge of our seats waiting for guys to return and Robo to get back out there, and then it's just been like, nope, Edmonton's the better team, and like we're going to see 2 conferences that just kind of fizzle out too quickly. But your take on that before I guess we switch to the Eastern Conference, because the Panthers are a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, just in general, I'm surprised that the games haven't been closer. And it's one thing if we're talking about like a 3-1 series lead, but they've gone to like overtimes. I don't think we've seen an overtime in this conference final, I'm pretty sure. I think. But yes, I'm thinking double overtimes and, you know, guys blocking 50 shots a night. And that's what I was expecting to see, as opposed to like blowout games, which is kind of what we've been getting. Obviously very exciting for Oilers fans. I've said this before, but you know, it's their year, so to speak, that they made it all the way to game 7 of the final last year. It lost to Florida, and it's their year to do it. So like for them, blowing and bowling over teams is no problem. The first round is always so exciting, but you know, we saw so many lead changes. We saw a couple hat tricks. We saw so many storylines that I was just expecting it to get more intense as the series went on. And it's kind of not gone that way. And for me, it's so unique with hockey. And let's not I'm not discrediting the Dallas Stars that they're like not putting up a fight, or the Carolina Hurricanes. Like I said, there are a lot of sports leagues where I don't feel like parity's a thing, and I just don't enjoy watching that much those sports. Right. But with hockey, it's always close. I just thought we'd have a little bit more of the, I don't know, what, like the intensity, I guess. And
hanging on to the edge of your seat moments, like waiting to see who's going to come out. Yeah.
And if you're the Dallas Stars and listening to our podcast, which I doubt they are, they're probably like, F you. Like, it's so intense on the ice. I'm not knocking that no one's putting in their like effort. It's so hard. And like looking at the box score, and the score doesn't even tell half the story. I just thought we'd have closer series. So that's
it's more the consistency of seeing like closer games and stuff. Because no, you're right. There hasn't been overtime. There's just been these like mega tilts of a team being more dominant in the third period. So game one, you just saw obviously the Dallas Stars capitalize on the power play over and over and over again, take over the third period, take game one. And then it just kind of the script flipped. Then you're seeing Edmonton Oilers have that dominant polish off towards the end of the games, and then more so putting the nail in the coffin in that third period. And at first, I thought we were going to see a little bit more depth scoring from the Stars, because then you get Tyler Seguin into the mix, and then you saw some other guys kind of make some pushes. But I think you said it perfectly. Like, the anticipation of seeing who's going to have the last say, the last dance, that hasn't been like as intense and as competitive as one would hope, especially considering conference finals. And then on the other flip of the coin, you got the Florida Panthers, who went into Hurricanes territory and decided to make it their own over and over and over again. And we knew that they were going to be a tough team because they found their stride versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the Panthers are that team that once they kind of get into a rhythm, they're very punishing and they're very good at being consistent at that. But again, you just wanted to see better hockey in the conference finals.
Totally. And we talked about Florida looking unbothered. I love that you kind of came up with that word, Obviously, they got shut out in the last game, but I don't think they're too stressed about it. And again, oh my God, I don't know why I always feel like I have to defend myself. It's just because I know how hard these guys work and I know how tough these athletes are, that I hate to come across thinking that Florida thinks they're coasting or they're just relaxing and that the Panthers are asleep. Sorry, the Hurricanes are asleep. The Carolina Panthers, NFL. Anyway, the Hurricanes are asleep. That's not at all what this is. It's just Florida they've got the recipe. And I don't know if it was with you, it was with Adam, and I don't even know if we got to it on the show, but in the notes, when we were talking pregame, what we were going to talk about on our show, we wanted to discuss rosters and building around teams that are proven to win, and teams copying that in terms of depth scoring, being able to roll all four lines, good goaltending. Obviously, this isn't rocket science. I think, those are obvious tools and ingredients, special teams, so on and so forth, and just kind of building these rosters to go all the way. And when you have two teams that are likely going all the way for 2 years in a row, the other teams around the league need to take notice and be what did they do at the deadline? And, what do they got that are the X factors? Either way, I hope I'm not wrong. I'm praying that the final goes 7 games or at least 6, and we're seeing we're on the edge of our seat for that.
I'm definitely hoping that's the case, but I think we can both make that a hopeful manifesto, because you're talking about seeing a lot of emotion out of a Connor McDavid when things didn't pan out for the Oilers last season. So that chip on their shoulder, that being so close and it not happening for them, for things almost going their way. And that final game was just what did they win by 1, maybe 2, the Panthers? So with it being so close, I feel like that stings even more. But you're totally right. I mean, I don't think that they're nonchalant in the sense of not bringing their best game to the ice. I think that they just have that goldfish memory. They turn the page so fast. And I mean, look who's leading the ship. Paul Maurice. His quotes as of late have just gotten even more Paul Maurice,
crazy,
if one can say.
Yes.
Yeah, the shotgunning a beer versus the things that he just comes up with for comparisons. You could tell that they're just very good at that game happened. It's they're the ex that you wish pined after you but never gives you a second thought. That's the Florida Panthers, if we're giving another relationship analogy.
A relationship analogy? Yeah, no, that's and that one hurts too. And you're don't you want me still?
Right. Don't you check my stories? No, I don't, actually.
No, I don't. Damn it. Just to wrap that thought, it's funny. I think I've told you that Paul Maurice's quotes, and his nonchalantness kind of bother me. But I'm wondering now, and maybe I do a deep dive in the off season. One of my friends is Jackie Redmond. She does a great job on TNT, and she's been doing the interviews with him. So I might do a deep dive on the psychology behind that. Maybe that's a great way to protect your team too.
Yes.
Maybe there's some kind of psychology behind taking the attention, being this quote dude, having this persona. Maybe there's something there about protecting his team, and I don't know. I don't want to get into it right now. It's more of a psychology thing, but I'm going to think about that, because it's not on purpose, and it does bug me a little bit, and it doesn't go unnoticed. But he could maybe have a tactic up his sleeve that seems to be working, especially when you do lose, if you can kind of be clowny about it. And I'm not saying he always is, but he's sometimes just the way he answers questions bothers me when they lose. Maybe that's a tactic. So we can revisit that conversation when the summer is a bit slower. But we do got to go to break because we have a couple more things to talk about. Olympic news and some Winter Classic news. We'll get your thoughts, Kasey, on that. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome back into the Hockey Hub here on NESN. Kasey and Sophia breaking down all the hockey things, from talking to Conor Ryan about offer sheet opportunities, the potential rumored breaking news, Sophia, as you put it so perfectly, of Marco Sturm maybe being the next head coach. And then we talk some conference finals, what's been interesting or less than entertaining, and then sticking with the Panthers for a second. The guys who are just ruling hockey right now, they'll be hosting a Winter Classic down in Florida versus the New York Rangers. There was a give and go, a push and pull to the reaction on this one, Sophia, about whether or not people were excited about there being a Winter Classic down in Florida. Of course, the first thing is the ice, the concern about the ice, but the entertainment around it being the Panthers as well as the Rangers. What do you make of all of these Winter Classics and outdoor games?
Yeah, I feel like there are too many. Stadium series and I don't know even what the other ones are called, but too many for sure. I remember the first one, and I think it was HBO or someone did like a behind the scenes, the 24/7 series. And again, this was before we had this. Behind the scenes was such a trendy word, like this access. Like it was so cool to get the behind the scenes and to like see the setup and the snow, and it was actually cold and it was so cool. And a once a year on New Year's Day, I think that's excellent. I understand from a fan's perspective, I think it kind of gets tiresome and gets annoying, but the league doesn't care. If the league is making money and if they're selling tickets and if they're selling swag, they're going to keep doing that. And so my thought about it being in Florida, you have a team that could barely sell out a couple of years ago, was not putting bums in the seats. All of a sudden, they are Stanley Cup finalists, then Stanley Cup champions, and they're growing the market there. If you're like an 18-year-old kid or a 5-year-old kid, and you didn't really know about the Florida Panthers, but all of a sudden everyone's talking about them because they're winning, you really care about the Winter Classic. And what the NHL wants is to grow more fans, to make more money. So to them, this makes sense. As a diehard, born and raised, longtime hockey fan myself who doesn't need the marketing, I don't really love it, but I get it in terms of dollars.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's taking away from the spark? I mean, context, Winter Classic, and now you're taking it down to the south. You're taking it to Florida, my backyard. And yes, the growth of the game is important, but do you think it's just going to take away, dull the spark that made the Winter Classic what it was? What was your favorite Winter Classic, by the way?
I would say like the first one, the earlier days were great. I did get to go to Detroit versus Toronto. We did a family, not my family, but someone really close to me, family kind of road trip, and it snowed the entire time, and it was freezing, and it was everything you kind of wanted. It was almost too cold, to be honest with you, but whatever. Like we knew that was happening. Check the weather, had the blankets, the hot chocolate, the warmers, but. And funnily enough, like it snowed the entire time. I couldn't really see anything of the game from the stands. Like we really didn't get to watch the game. But Toronto versus Detroit, and it was exactly what you'd want out of an outdoor game NHL experience. So do I think the spark has died or sending it to Florida? I think it's already kind of over. Like the spark of the Winter Classic has kind of been done. That's not to say that the league shouldn't continue to do it. I mean, and I also got to cover the Bruins one at Fenway, which was so great. Bruins and Penguins,
Yeah.
So like that's where I'm kind of like talking two sides out of my mouth, because that was so exciting and it was so fun, and Fenway and, Sidney Crosby and Patrice Bergeron facing off in the face-off circle, like two legends, like, teammates on Team Canada. So cool. And when it's in your city, you're like, hell yeah. So that's why it's not really fair for me to say, who cares? Or like the spark's kind of over. I think the league, if they just stuck to kind of like one outdoor game a season, it would draw more attention in terms of viewership. But actually, they have the numbers. I don't. And I think if they were losing money, they wouldn't be doing this. So obviously, people are paying attention. What's your thought on it? You're from Florida. If you didn't work here and you were, 20 years old or whatever, like a young budding kid wanting to get into sports, would you care? And would you want to make the drive to go?
Yeah, I think if I was in my 20s and, still in Florida and stuff, I would love that opportunity for seeing how they're going to pull more fans that are down in Florida, how they're going to continue to grow the game. And like you said, I mean, the marketing aspect of putting this there helps with growing the game. You've got Wayne Gretzky, who's doing a development center down there. So you've got, NHLers and Hall of Famers that are investing so much money in the Florida market. I think that that's something else that adds to it. But it's just kind of cool to see that, like, that's a bigger conversation in a state that never was considered for hockey whatsoever. Growing up, I know a lot of people are like, well, how'd you even get into hockey? Well, when my dad got stationed to a random small town, the two options there were tennis and skating. My mom's business partner's son played hockey. His daughter figure skated. And then my mom came home one day with a pair of skates and said, go join Lauren and figure it out. But I learned early on that, like, the guys that I grew up with and the guys that I hung out at the rink with, by 6th, 7th grade, they had to A, afford boarding school, and B, make a decision to leave their hometown to go to the boarding school to even have an opportunity to potentially play in college or in Canada and maybe AHL or NHL one day. So I'm just hoping that it shifts the market in a sense of, like, there's going to be better development in Florida to where guys don't have to pay and shovel out money to go to boarding school to just have a chance in the league. So that's where I come from on that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're doing. And like being reminded of the Bruins had a outdoor game at Lake Tahoe, and it was COVID, and I was supposed to go as the reporter, but we weren't traveling because COVID and that whole thing. So yeah, I missed out on that opportunity. So again, if you're part of it, of course it's so exciting. Like, I would have loved to cover that. Would have loved to do that. Our producer letting me know that the Bruins have an outdoor game this season. Whoops, didn't know that, at Tampa as part of the Stadium Series. So if I get to go to that or cover that, like, I'm not going to be sitting there being like, this is overdone. Like, obviously, if you're part of it, it's so
you'll love
cool.
it. Raymond James Stadium is going to be a fine area for the game, and plus Tampa will make it fun. Biasly,
maybe it's just more thinking of, like, I remember the first Winter Classic. Everyone who likes hockey, whether or not your team was playing in it, they were watching. Like, it was like a spectacle. And you can't expect something that's been repeated 10, 15, 20 times to still be a spectacle. So, like, with whatever it is. So it's the NHL isn't doing anything wrong. It's maybe more of like a TV experience. It's not that much of a spectacle. But if your team's in it, and if you're trying to grow the game, like you said, it's going to bring a lot of attention to businesses who might be like, wait, this hockey thing, look how many numbers showed up. Maybe we do invest in a rink. Maybe we do get skates for our kids. The NHL and Gary Bettman say what you want about him. We have 32 teams now in the league. They have done an excellent job growing the game, and that is his main job. People forget that. People are like, oh, Bettman this, Bettman that. He's a hockey fan, I'm sure now, but he's a businessman. And if he's running a business, he's doing a good job. So anyway, that's my rant. I think we got to go to break. You can send us to break if you have any final thoughts, but that's my little rant.
No, you're 100% true. In order for us to keep upping these contracts and adding to the capital, we've got to grow the game, which means more fans and burrowing our way further through Florida. So maybe more on this, but definitely got to get some updates on some other things going on around the NHL, or more so the Olympics, on the other side of this quick break. Don't go anywhere. Stick with Sophia and myself here on the Hockey Hub. Welcome back into the Hockey Hub. Kasey and Sophia, as promised, going to give a quick update when it comes to the Olympics. So it's been announced that Russia will still not partake in the upcoming Olympics. And the biggest question mark around that, are obviously heartfelt reach, is Alex Ovechkin, and it maybe being his last opportunity, or likely his last opportunity to play in the Olympics, and now that's not really a thing. So obviously, without us getting too far into it, Sophia, probably your initial reactions to this when we think about Ovi. We talked about him so much on here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously very disappointed for him, and just the way it's crazy, because he has a very long career. To think that for the majority of your career, you're not eligible to play in the Olympics because of the way the negotiations between the PA and the NHL were going. They weren't allowing them for a couple of I believe it was 2 Olympics, but definitely Pyeongchang. And then COVID hit, and that was a big discussion. Were they going to let them go? Were they going to let them go? And in order to save the season without guys getting too sick or the testing, they decided not to do that. And I remember for Bergeron, who addressed it at the podium for the Boston Bruins side, he was just so disappointed because he felt that was going to be his last one and indeed it was. And I remember seeing like how gutted he was, like gutted and angry. And Bergie never got angry. He was very composed, but like you can just tell that it hurt him so much. And so I didn't get to talk to Ovechkin about it, but like every guy says, you dream of winning the Stanley Cup, but almost more, you dream of representing your country and winning gold. And so, yeah, it's not their decision. They're powerless in this like crazy political climate, and then powerless with the negotiations. Sad for him. I feel like we've only got a minute left, so I want you to get your two cents in there. But also really quick, whoever does win gold, got to put that asterisk that you didn't face Russia, who has some of the best players in the world. So That's my thoughts.
No, I couldn't agree more. Some of the best out there, and they want to compete against each other, as people, as players that have worked so hard their entire career to compete against the best and just admire each other's play. I think you put it perfectly, though. You're powerless in this situation in a sense. So I think that makes it a bit of a tougher pill to swallow, so I can understand the passion and protection that other players have for some of the players that won't get a chance to compete. But all right, that's a wrap for us today. We had Conor Ryan. Huh?
I said we're done.
We're done. We had Conor Ryan. A reminder to check out the details of offer sheet information and stay up to date with us for the head coach conversation. Until next time.